When you think of gladiators, you probably imagine bloodthirsty warriors swinging swords for survival in brutal, no-holds-barred battles. But what if I told you that their greatest weapon wasn't just the sword or the shield, but a deeply ingrained code of honor? How could men who fought to the death for entertainment follow a code of respect, loyalty, and discipline? Gladiators, those fierce fighters in the blood-stained sand of ancient Rome, were much more than simple slaves or brutal killers. They were warriors, some of whom were willing to sacrifice everything for fame, glory, and the respect of both their comrades and the crowds. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover that the truth about gladiators isn't what you might think. But we'll peel back the layers of their lives, challenge your assumptions, and dive deep into their code of honor, one that transcended the arena. By the end, you might see these warriors in a completely different light. In ancient Rome, when the word gladiator is mentioned, most people picture slaves, condemned criminals, or men of lowly status. But the truth is, many gladiators weren't forced into battle at all. In fact, some were volunteers, drawn by the allure of fame, fortune, and a chance to prove themselves in front of thousands of spectators. The term gladiator itself comes from the Latin word gladius, meaning sword. But far from being just sword-wielding slaves, gladiators were often highly respected figures, especially those who had won several bouts and gained fame in the arena. Some were slaves, captured prisoners, criminals, or men with debts too steep to repay. However, many others chose to enter the arena of their own accord, seeking glory and fortunes. One fascinating fact is that some gladiators became celebrities of their time. Think about it. Imagine a modern-day athlete or movie star, but instead of television appearances, these gladiators gained their fame in the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum. For a select few, gladiatorial combat became a path to wealth, a place where you could win not just the favor of the crowds, but also riches and land. Gladiators also enjoyed a unique social standing that blurred the lines between slaves and free men. While they were often treated as property by their owners, in the arena, their value was measured by their prowess and charisma, qualities that earned them fame and respect. Gladiators lived in Toludius, special training schools where they honed their skills. These schools were not just places of combat training, they were also cultural hubs where a warrior could learn discipline, gain status, and often form lifelong bonds with their fellow fighters. The decision to become a gladiator wasn't always driven by desperation. In fact, some volunteers saw it as a way to rise above their circumstances and enter the spotlight. Gladiators were individuals who sought to earn their place in history, driven by a mix of personal ambition and the desire for fame. Many saw the arena as a stage for personal glory, a place where, even in death, they could achieve immortality. But what does it mean to truly become a gladiator? Was it just about skill in combat, or was there more to it? Here's the key. Becoming a gladiator meant embracing a life bound by both the physical demands of battle and a warrior's ethos, a moral code of honor that demanded much more than just brute strength. These warriors were not simply fighting for survival, they were fighting for respect, and for many, that respect was worth more than life itself. Imagine this, you're standing in the arena, facing an opponent who is just as skilled as you. In that moment, victory is not just about survival, it's about proving yourself worthy of the title of gladiator. It's about earning the crowd's favor, about living up to a code that demanded not just strength but also honor, respect, and dignity. Victory meant more than life, it meant legacy. And here's the strange thing, many gladiators, despite their violent profession, held deep personal codes of honor that were rooted in loyalty to their comrades and respect for their enemies. This was a warrior class, and as warriors, they were bound by something far greater than the violence they displayed in the arena. In fact, these gladiators were often governed by a moral framework, one that dictated that respect for both fellow fighters and the spectators was just as important as winning. But the question remains, why would anyone willingly choose a life so harsh, so unforgiving? Why enter the arena, where the price of failure could be death? The answer lies in the gladiator's identity, a mix of warrior pride and the pursuit of glory. Becoming a gladiator was a personal decision, a declaration that one was willing to risk everything for a chance at immortality, for a chance to be remembered as a hero. This complex, layered identity was one that transcended the simple role of fighter, and as we explore more about these ancient warriors, you'll see how their courage and honor transformed them into something much more than just gladiators. So, what does this mean for us today? How can the lessons of gladiators impact our modern understanding of courage, honor, and identity? Stick with me, because as we continue exploring, you're about to uncover some of the most surprising truths about the gladiator's way of life. And trust me, this is just the beginning. Stay tuned, because in the next sections, we'll dive deeper into the gladiatorial code of honor, explore how it shaped their lives, and challenge everything you thought you knew about these ancient warriors. What if I told you that the real power of a gladiator wasn't in the sword he wielded, but in the code of honor that guided his every action? Gladiators were far more than just fighters battling for their lives in the Colosseum. They lived by a strict moral code, one that demanded respect for their opponent, loyalty to their comrades, and an unwavering commitment to their performance, both on and off the sand. It wasn't just about survival, it was about fighting with honor, and for many gladiators, it was this code that defined their very existence. Most people think gladiators were nothing more than brutal killers, thrust into an endless cycle of violence, but the reality is more complex. Gladiators followed a strict set of rules during their fights, a code that governed their behavior, their interactions with the crowd, crowd, and even their own internal values. But how could such brutal combat coexist with a system of ethics? What did the Gladiators' code really entail, and how did it shape their actions inside and outside the arena? Let's dive in. At the heart of a gladiator's fight was not just a struggle for survival, it was an expression of a warrior's honor. Gladiators weren't just fighting to stay alive, they were bound by a deeper moral code, one that dictated that respect for both their opponent and the crowd was paramount. When a gladiator stepped into the arena, he wasn't just fighting for the victory, he was performing, putting on a show for thousands of spectators, some of whom might hold his fate in their hands. The very essence of gladiatorial combat was rooted in the idea of spectacle and performance, with honor as its core principle. Consider the iconic Pollis Verso gesture, the thumbs up or thumbs down that has become synonymous with life and death in the arena. Most people think of the gesture as a simple decision between life and death, but the truth is, the thumbs up or down was often a gesture of respect, one rooted in the fight's outcome and not purely in the brutality of the contest. The decision wasn't always made on the whim of a bloodthirsty crowd, it was part of a carefully constructed system of honor that allowed for mercy, respect, and at times even admiration for a worthy opponent. This respect extended beyond the fight itself. Gladiators were expected to surrender if defeated. Imagine being in a life or death struggle, and yet your honor demanded that you submit, not in fear, but in recognition of your opponent's superior skill. This act of surrender wasn't seen as a weakness, but as a demonstration of integrity, a gladiator's acknowledgement of his opponent's prowess. After all, survival was important, but respect and dignity were equally vital. But here's the controversial truth. The idea of gladiatorial combat as pure brutality was far from the reality that many gladiators experienced. The fight was as much about strategy, showmanship, and even skillful choreography as it was about brute strength. Their movements, their engagement with the crowd, and their ability to create tension and drama were critical aspects of their success. To put it simply, a gladiator's performance was often just as important as his ability to fight. In the Colosseum, winning wasn't always about who landed the deadliest blow. It was about how you fought, how you performed, and how you respected the code that governed the arena. These warriors had learned to read their audience, adjusting their tactics, their actions, and even their demeanor to earn the crowd's favor. A gladiator who fought with style, who showcased skill and bravery, could gain the respect of the crowd, even if he didn't win the fight. But what about the outcome of the fight itself? Wasn't it about victory after all? Yes, victory was important, but it wasn't the only thing that defined a gladiator. Gladiators fought with honor, which meant they fought to win, but they also fought to uphold their own code. Fighting with dignity, giving respect to their opponent, and engaging in the contest with integrity were all fundamental parts of this code. For many gladiators, these principles defined their identity. Now, here's something many people don't realize. These principles weren't only about the fight. Gladiators also had to live by this code outside the arena, and when they weren't fighting, they were training, preparing themselves physically and mentally to embody the gladiator's ethos. And this wasn't a simple task. It required intense discipline. Always spent hours training in the allure, the gladiatorial schools, where they learned not just combat techniques, but also the mental fortitude needed to survive the arena. Training was as much about mental strength as it was about physical conditioning. A gladiator's mind had to be as sharp as his sword. It wasn't enough to be a skilled fighter. A gladiator had to be mentally prepared for the harsh realities of combat. He had to learn to control his fear, to suppress doubt, and to stay focused when his life was on the line. And yet, despite the constant threat of death, gladiators often formed deep bonds with each other. Brotherhood wasn't just an abstract concept, it was a survival mechanism. Gladiators relied on one another for emotional and physical support. Together, they faced the same dangers, shared the same hardships, and lived by the same code of honor. But here's the thing that might surprise you. Many gladiators were not just fighting for the crowd's approval or for their own survival. They fought for their comrades, for their sense of brotherhood, and for the respect that came with upholding their code. These bonds were often stronger than the ties they had with their masters or families, and in some cases, this brotherhood transcended even the violence of the arena, creating a sense of unity that carried them through their darkest moments. So, you see, the life of a gladiator wasn't just about violence or bloodshed. It was about living according to a strict code of honor, respecting both the rules of combat and the people involved. Gladiators were not mere savages. They were warriors, shaped by a warrior's ethos that valued skill, integrity, and loyalty above all else. But the question remains, how far did this code extend? Was it just a set of rules they followed in the arena, or did it influence their entire way of life? And what does this code tell us about the nature of honor itself? Stick with me as we explore the deeper layers of the gladiator's code. You won't want to miss how this ethos shaped their identities both in and out of the arena. Gladiators weren't just brutal fighters, they were performers, and their code of conduct revolved not only around surviving, but entertaining the audience as well. The crowds in the Colosseum weren't just passive spectators, they were a powerful force that could determine the fate of a gladiator. Imagine this, you've spent hours in brutal training, learning how to fight, how to survive, and now you stand in front of thousands of eyes, ready to face an opponent who might be just as skilled, just as determined. What could possibly be more terrifying than the roar of the crowd, the weight of their expectations on your shoulders? The truth is, the crowd could make or break a gladiator's career. But how did these warriors earn the respect respect of such a volatile, ever-changing audience? The answer lies in their ability to read the crowd, adjust their tactics, and engage in a performance as much as a fight. Gladiators weren't just swinging swords. They were playing a role, one that could bring them fame, wealth, and the admiration of the masses. The gladiators' performance went beyond the clash of steel. It was about showmanship, strategy, and time. It's easy to picture a gladiator as someone fighting for survival, but it's much harder to imagine the mental pressure of performing for an audience that expects more than just a victory. They expect a spectacle. Gladiators were expected to demonstrate bravery, skill, and grace in battle, all while ensuring the audience was entertained. If they failed to engage the crowd, they risked being marked as unworthy. That's the paradox of gladiatorial combat. Survival was important, yes, but survival as a respected gladiator often meant winning the approval of the crowd through performance. There's a controversial and somewhat surprising fact. Gladiators weren't necessarily fighting to the death in every battle. In fact, many times the life or death aspect was more about the performance. Gladiators had to impress not only with their strength and skill, but with their ability to engage and win the crowd's favor. The more dramatic, the better. Many gladiators, especially those who became famous, were known for how they handled the crowd. This was not just about swinging swords in a bloody contest. It was about putting on a show, about knowing when to land the killing blow and when to leave the crowd wanting more. This brings us to an often overlooked aspect of gladiatorial combat. The crowd wasn't just a passive audience. They could decide the fate of the gladiators. The famous e pollis verso gesture, the thumbs up or down, has become synonymous with deciding whether a gladiator would live or die. But did you know that this decision wasn't always made in the way many imagine? In some cases, the do pollis verso was a signal of mercy, not a brutal sentence of death. Gladiators who performed exceptionally well, who impressed the crowd with their bravery, their skill, their honor, could be granted mercy, regardless of the outcome of the fight. There's a strange, almost forgotten fact. The crowd's decision to grant mercy was sometimes based more on the gladiator's performance than on the actual result of the fight. If a fighter managed to show incredible skill, bravery, or even humor in battle, they could sway the crowd's emotions. The crowds in the arena were not always thirsting for blood. They were looking for heroes. In a sense, a gladiator's ability to entertain and evoke emotion from the crowd was as important, if not more important, than the physical victory. Now, here's something that might make you pause. Gladiators, despite their brutal image, were also entertainers in the same vein as modern-day athletes or performers. They didn't just fight to survive, they fought to impress. Their showmanship was an essential part of their success. The question remains, how did gladiators learn to adapt to such high-pressure situations? The answer lies in the training they underwent. At the Duality, the gladiator training schools, gladiators weren't just learning how to wield a sword or a spear. They were learning how to read the audience, how to perform, how to make every movement dramatic, and how to win not just with their skill, but with their charisma. Their trainers, the Doctorisi, were not just teaching them combat techniques. They were preparing them for the mental and emotional challenges of the arena. It was here that gladiators learned to perfect their craft, understanding that a fight was as much a performance as a battle for survival. But what if a gladiator couldn't adapt? What happened to those who failed to engage the crowd, those who couldn't find their rhythm in the arena? In a world where performance was as important as fighting, they risked fading into obscurity, their careers cut short, their lives rendered meaningless. It's fascinating, yet little known, that some of the most famous gladiators were known not only for their skill in battle, but for their ability to entertain. Take, for example, the famous gladiator Spartacus, who led a massive slave revolt. While he was undoubtedly skilled in combat, his leadership and ability to rally the masses were what made him legendary, not just his prowess in the arena. Gladiators like him understood the importance of performance, of capturing the audience's attention, and using that to their advantage. So what does this mean about the nature of gladiatorial combat? It means that being a gladiator was about more than just swinging swords in a blood-soaked battle. It was about understanding the crowd, entertaining them, and performing with honor. It was about creating a spectacle that went beyond just survival. Gladiators had to be skilled, brave, and above all, aware of how their performance would be received by the masses. In a way, they were not just warriors, they were artists, creating a story of bravery, skill, and drama with every fight. As we dive deeper into the gladiators' world, it becomes clear that their code of honor wasn't just about respect for their opponents. It was also about respecting the crowd. The crowd's judgment, their approval or disapproval, was a critical part of a gladiator's journey. But that wasn't the only challenge they faced. As we continue, we'll explore the bond between gladiators and their trainers, and how these relationships were vital in shaping their identities, their honor, and their lives both in and out of the arena. Stay tuned, because what you'll learn next may just change your view of what it really meant to be a gladiator. Fighting together in the arena forged relationships that were just as important as the battles themselves. But what was the true meaning of gladiatorial brotherhood? To many, the idea of gladiators forming tight-knit communities might seem strange. After all, these were warriors trained to fight, often to the death, against one another. But in reality, the gladiatorial bond was built on a deep foundation of loyalty, shared experiences, and mutual respect. Imagine, for a moment, being part of a group of warriors who faced the same brutal training, the same deadly fights, and yet, instead of being rivals, they are your closest allies. Gladiators, more than anything, understood the importance of looking out for each other. another. The arena was a place where physical prowess was tested, but it was also a place where mental fortitude, courage, and loyalty were truly defined. Gladiators often spent years training together in Duality gladiator schools, where they forged unbreakable bonds. These were not just fighting schools, they were places of survival, where camaraderie played a critical role in their mental and physical preparation. Each gladiator had to trust his fellow combatants. The stakes were high. A fight in the arena wasn't just about personal glory, it was about supporting one another and surviving the brutal, unforgiving world they inhabited. The bond between gladiators went beyond friendship. It was rooted in something deeper, a sense of pietas, a Roman concept that emphasized loyalty and duty. In the context of gladiators, pietas meant that they would do everything in their power to protect each other in battle, no matter the cost. It was a relationship built on honor, where each gladiator's well-being was inextricably tied to the well-being of the others. In many cases, gladiators swore solemn vows to protect one another in battle, forming a kind of brotherhood of arms. This loyalty wasn't just about survival, it was about maintaining honor and upholding a code that transcended the arena. One of the strangest facts about this brotherhood is that it could often rival, or even surpass, the relationships found in normal Roman society. While Roman society was built on a strict hierarchy, the bond between gladiators was different. It was a bond formed through shared hardship, mutual respect, and the constant presence of death hanging over them. They knew they could rely on each other in a way that was often more genuine and trustworthy than relationships between free men. This is a powerful idea. Gladiators, who were often seen as lower-class figures or even slaves, formed the deepest, most loyal relationships within their own ranks. Their survival in the arena depended not just on their ability to fight, but on their ability to trust and protect one another. There's a surprising and rare fact about gladiatorial brotherhood that many people don't realize. The relationship between a gladiator and his trainer was often just as intense and profound. Gladiators weren't simply warriors trained to fight. They were often fiercely loyal to their trainers, who were considered mentors as much as combat instructors. Ethos weren't just teaching gladiators how to wield weapons. They were shaping the gladiators' minds, instilling the same sense of loyalty, discipline, and respect for the code of honor that was central to their survival. In a way, gladiators viewed their trainers as figures of authority who provided guidance in both battle and life. The relationship between a gladiator and his auditores could be one of the most significant in their lives, reinforcing the idea that loyalty and brotherhood were central to their very identity. The concept of loyalty in the arena also extended beyond the gladiators themselves. Many gladiators would form bonds with their trainers, a kind of loyalty that existed beyond the battlefield. The bond wasn't one-sided either. Many trainers, knowing the challenges their fighters faced, took it upon themselves to foster a sense of brotherhood and unity among their charges. It's not just about teaching how to fight, it's about creating warriors who could think strategically, who understood the importance of fighting together, and who had the mental resilience to face death every day. But the nature of gladiatorial brotherhood wasn't just about mental toughness. It was about emotional survival too. Gladiators shared their personal struggles, their fears, and their hopes for glory with each other. This created a deep emotional connection that couldn't be easily replicated in Roman society, and helped them cope with the immense psychological strain they faced. It was the brotherhood within the Duality that kept gladiators grounded, giving them the strength to carry on even in the most difficult of times. What's particularly controversial is the idea that the arena could, in a way, foster these deep relationships. Many people think of gladiators as isolated, solitary figures fighting for their lives. The reality, however, is that their strongest ties were often with each other. The brutal, cutthroat nature of their world didn't push them into isolation, it pushed them into each other's arms. Gladiators were part of a community, and the success of each fighter relied on the strength of the others. This dynamic challenges the common belief that gladiators fought alone in the most literal sense. They were warriors, yes, but they were also part of a larger system of brotherhood, loyalty, and mutual survival. One rare fact that might surprise you is that the bond between gladiators wasn't always just about fighting. Many gladiators would make solemn vows to protect one another in combat, pledging their lives in a way that mirrored the oaths of soldiers. These bonds weren't limited to the fight itself, but extended into their everyday lives, where they supported one another through the brutal, often soul-crushing conditions of their training and preparation. The importance of brotherhood and loyalty among gladiators highlights a key aspect of their identity that is often overlooked. Gladiators were not just faceless fighters, they were individuals who lived by a code that demanded respect for one another, not just their trainers or the audience. Their relationships with their fellow gladiators were fundamental to their survival, and their loyalty to one another transcended the walls of the arena. But there's an even deeper question here. How did these gladiators manage to maintain this bond under such intense pressure? How did they keep their humanity intact while living in a world where death was ever present and betrayal was always a threat? To answer that, we need to look closer at the pietas that shaped their loyalty and the role of this loyalty in their survival. Next, we'll dive into the concept of loyalty within the gladiatorial world and see how it played out in moments of extreme danger. Stay tuned, because the story of gladiatorial brotherhood is far from over. You might think that every gladiator fought to the death, but the truth is, death was not as common as you might might expect in the arena. What was the real nature of these deadly battles? Did gladiators constantly face the possibility of death, or was there more to their fights than we've been led to believe? Let's start with the facts. While movies and stories often paint a picture of gladiators battling to the death in every match, the reality was more nuanced. In fact, most gladiatorial combats did not end in death. The Gladiator, or the organizer of the games, often had the final say in whether the fight ended with death or mercy. Gladiators were expensive investments, and their value was not simply in their ability to fight, but also in their potential to bring in more crowds and earn more victories. Killing a gladiator wasn't always in the best interest of the organizers. Now think about it for a moment. Gladiators who lost a fight didn't necessarily face death. Instead, many fights ended when one of the combatants was knocked out or incapacitated. At this point, the defeated gladiator could beg for mercy. The thumbs up or thumbs down gesture that has become iconic in popular culture was actually not always a straightforward decision made on pure brutality. It was often influenced by the combatant's performance, the audience's reaction, and the will of the Gladiator. But here's the twist. Though gladiators often survived their battles, there was still a looming danger: humiliation. Losing in front of a crowd, even without dying, could severely damage a gladiator's reputation. Some gladiators would fight their hardest, not just to win, but to maintain their dignity. This sense of pride and the constant risk of disgrace became an integral part of their identity. It wasn't just about surviving the fight, it was about keeping your honor intact. This brings us to an interesting fact. The myth of the death match in the Colosseum has been dramatically exaggerated over time. While there were indeed fatal fights, many of the matches were carefully controlled and staged, with gladiators often walking away from the arena alive, though severely injured. So why did the idea of gladiators fighting to the death persist? Because it created a more sensational story for the spectators, and, more importantly, for the Roman elite who used these games for propaganda purposes. In fact, gladiatorial games were as much about spectacle as they were about combat. The fights were designed to be a form of entertainment, and in many cases, gladiators were treated as celebrities. Some were adored by the crowds and became wealthy, earning fame and even freedom if they performed exceptionally. This wasn't a simple blood sport. It was a carefully constructed public display meant to entertain, educate, and reinforce Roman values. Now let's talk about the financial side of things. They trained for years to hone their skills, and their survival in the arena meant more lucrative contracts and more games. It didn't make sense to kill them off quickly. If a gladiator was highly skilled and popular, he was an investment, and the editor would want to prolong that investment as long as possible. A gladiator who fought bravely but didn't die was still considered a hero, even if he wasn't the ultimate victor. A rare fact: gladiators fought in rounds. That's right, these weren't always all-or-nothing battles. A gladiator might lose a round but still survive to fight another day. In many cases, matches were not one single fight, but a series of exchanges, with fighters getting multiple opportunities to prove their skill. This method added complexity to the matches and allowed the gladiators to show their endurance, skill, and ability to recover after a fall. But let's dig deeper. What about the perception of death itself? Gladiators, despite not always dying in the arena, lived with the constant threat of death hanging over them. This daily reminder of mortality shaped their mindset. The psychological toll of knowing that every fight could be your last was immense. Many gladiators didn't just fight for survival, they fought for the glory of victory, the hope of freedom, and the respect of their peers. Their desire to fight and win was intertwined with the intense emotional and social bonds they developed within the Duality and among their fellow gladiators. While the myths about gladiators have painted them as savage warriors seeking death in the arena, the truth is that they were highly skilled performers who navigated a complex world where survival and reputation were just as important as victory. Their courage to face down danger without knowing if they would survive was, in many ways, their greatest strength. Gladiators were not just fighting for their lives, they were fighting to prove their worth in a world that saw them as expendable. And here's a controversial point. Some of these fighters, despite being glorified in death, didn't have to die. The decision was often in the hands of the Gladiator and the whims of the crowd, but their fate was so often tied to how they performed that it could feel like the arena was their only chance to prove their worth. The real question then isn't just whether gladiators lived or died, but how they managed to survive, both physically and mental, under such overwhelming pressure. So what's the solution to the myth of gladiators and their deadly fights? Understanding that the true nature of these battles was far more complex than most realize. Gladiators didn't always fight to the death, but the psychological battle they fought in their minds was just as brutal. To fully appreciate the life of a gladiator, we need to see beyond the bloodshed and understand the honor, survival, and spectacle that truly defined their place in Roman society. In the next section, we'll take a deeper look into the rituals surrounding gladiatorial combat, which played a major role in how these warriors prepared for their battles. Stay tuned. What we uncover next may surprise you. Gladiatorial combat wasn't just about fighting. It was a deeply rooted ritual that connected warriors with the cultural and religious fabric of Roman society. But how were these rituals connected to the gladiators' honor? What role did they play before and after the fight? Before each battle, gladiators performed a variety of rituals. These rituals were not just superstitions. They were vital mental preparation for the intense combat that lay ahead. They would often make a prayer to the gods, asking for victory or safety. Some even swore their allegiance to specific deities, believing their fate in the arena was linked to divine will. Imagine the pressure on a gladiator, knowing that the gods themselves were watching and influencing the outcome of the fight. And yet, despite the blood and violence, there was an element of performance. Gladiators weren't just warriors, they were part of a larger theatrical display. The very nature of the fights was often staged as acts of heroism, with gladiators playing roles much like actors on stage. They were expected to fight not just for survival, but for the admiration of the audience. Tears of the crowd could elevate a gladiator to the status of a hero. This isn't just something we see in the movies. Gladiators were revered as celebrities in their time. They could win wealth, fame, and even freedom. But it wasn't just their skill with weapons that won them these accolades. It was their ability to perform, to embody the role of a brave warrior in the eyes of thousands. After the fight, the rituals didn't stop. If a gladiator survived and won, his victory was celebrated in a ceremonial parade. They would be lauded and perhaps even given gifts, but it was a ritual of acknowledgement. The victorious gladiator's name could be spoken in the same breath as the greatest Roman heroes. They were honored not only for their skill in combat, but for their bravery, discipline, and honor in the face of death. Now, here's something many don't realize. These rituals didn't just happen in the arena. They were part of the larger Roman culture, deeply intertwined with Roman ideals of bravery, duty, and sacrifice. The arena wasn't just a place of violence. It was a sacred space where warriors could prove their worth and their loyalty to Rome and the gods. Gladiators weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for a larger cause. But the relationship between the gladiator and his performance went beyond physical rituals. The bond between the gladiator and his trainer was rooted in a shared understanding of these cultural and spiritual practices. Gladiators were often taught to understand their role as a warrior through these rituals. Their training went far beyond the physical. It was about preparing them mentally for the immense pressure of the arena. Here's a strange fact. Some gladiators were given the option to fight in mock battles, meaning that not all gladiatorial combat was real. These battles allowed gladiators to demonstrate their skills without the threat of immediate death, giving them the opportunity to display their abilities and earn respect without losing their lives. This kind of performance-based battle was part of the spectacle that entertained the masses and made the gladiators' honor and skill the core of the show. This brings us to a controversial point. Many people think gladiators were just brutal, mindless fighters, but in reality, their role as performers in a larger religious and social context is often overlooked. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were performing as symbols of Roman values and ideals. The concept of virtus, virtue, courage, and manliness, was a key part of the gladiators' identity. These battles, though deadly, were often about proving these virtues and embodying the ideals that the Roman people revered. And while the public saw gladiators as mere fighters, the truth is that they were following a complex code of honor, one that involved not just physical prowess, but discipline, respect for the audience, and a deep understanding of their role in Roman. And here's something most people don't know. While gladiators were often pitted against one another in battle, they formed lifelong bonds with one another. These friendships were forged through the hardship of combat and the shared experience of training and survival. Gladiators swore oaths of brotherhood, often stronger than those found in regular Roman society. They fought to protect each other, forming a tight-knit community that transcended the brutality of the arena. This was the true spirit of hypiedax, a Roman concept of loyalty and duty, not just to the state, but to each other. So, what does all this tell us? The rituals surrounding gladiatorial combat were far more than just a series of superstitions. They were an essential part of the gladiator's journey. These warriors didn't just fight for survival. They fought for honor, glory, and respect, and the rituals they performed before and after their fights reinforced these values, helping to create a legacy that has endured to this day. In the next section, we will dive deeper into the concept of winning and glory, exploring what it truly meant to be a champion in ancient Rome. Keep watching, because the next revelation will change the way you think about gladiators and their place in Roman society. Being a champion gladiator meant more than just surviving the arena. It was about the pursuit of glory, the accumulation of respect, and an honor that went beyond mere physical prowess. What did it truly take to be a hero in ancient Rome? For a gladiator, the ultimate reward wasn't just the promise of survival, but the chance at fame, wealth, and status. Winning in the arena could mean a lifetime of prosperity. Successful gladiators could be gifted with large sums of money, fine clothing, and perhaps even land. They could enjoy the comforts of wealth, which was a far cry from the grim reality of the arena. In fact, winning a gladiatorial contest could even grant a fighter their freedom. The Eruditarius title, bestowed on gladiators who earned their freedom, was one of the most coveted honors a fighter could achieve. And if you think about it, that wasn't just freedom from physical chains. It was freedom from a life of uncertainty and violence. But it wasn't just about what a gladiator could gain materially. It was the respect of both the crowd and fellow warriors that defined a champion. Imagine standing in front of thousands of spectators, each one expecting a show of strength, skill, and honor. The gladiators had to not only be fierce but also precise, tactical, and strategic in their movements, making every fight a spectacle of performance. Some gladiators would even become celebrities of their time, their names known far and wide, even by the political elite. Their fame could transcend the arena, leading to sponsorships, gifts, and endorsements from the the upper echelons of Roman society. Here's something you may not know. Being a successful gladiator could even lead to a career after their fighting days were over. Some gladiators went on to become trainers, passing on their knowledge to new recruits and helping shape the next generation of warriors. They were seen as experts in combat, and their wisdom was highly valued. They could build a legacy beyond their bloody battles in the arena. But this idea of winning wasn't as simple as it may seem. Gladiators weren't just out there to survive. They fought to impress. They had to live up to an expectation of bravery, honor, and strength that the Roman society revered. It wasn't enough to defeat your opponent. You had to do so with dignity and grace. The audience expected it, and the Roman people admired it. Gladiators who could fight well and survive were respected, but those who could fight with style, with showmanship, and with heart were immortalized in the history of the empire. For a gladiator to earn the title of herediarius was a monumental achievement. It wasn't just a ticket to freedom. It was a symbol of honor, recognition, and the epitome of what a gladiator could achieve. The recognition of this title was often celebrated in grand ceremonies, reinforcing the idea that a gladiator's honor was more important than just surviving the fight. It was a way to pay homage to the warrior's journey, their sacrifice, and their ability to endure, not just in battle but in the very heart of Roman society. But winning wasn't without its drawbacks. With the fame came the pressure, the eyes of the public constantly watching. Every fight mattered. Every performance was a testament to their skill and courage. To the gladiator, the arena wasn't just a battleground. It was their stage, and the crowd wasn't just spectators. They were judges. The gladiators could rise or fall based on the whims of the audience, their lives in the hands of the Roman masses. Their success depended not only on their ability to win, but on their ability to entertain, to embody the ideals of Roman masculinity and courage, and to do so with a display of discipline and precision. Here's something surprising. Gladiators weren't always in deadly duels. Many fights ended with a loss of honor but not of life. Roman society, pragmatic as it was, realized that a gladiator was a valuable asset, and while the bloodshed and drama of the arena were essential to keep the masses entertained, the loss of a gladiator, especially one who had earned significant fame, was a costly affair. The myth of the deathmatch often exaggerated the truth. Gladiators fought to impress and entertain more than they fought to die. Many were spared their lives if they proved their valor, even in defeat. But let's not forget the controversy that surrounds this idea. Many think gladiators were nothing more than mere slaves, forced into a pit to fight for survival. The reality, many gladiators volunteered. The decision to become a gladiator was driven by personal motivations, the desire for status, and sometimes even the hope of winning the ultimate prize. There was also a rare bond forged between gladiators, one built not only on mutual respect but also on shared hardship. The bonds formed within the Duality, the training schools, were unbreakable. Gladiators depended on each other, their survival often hinging on the support of their brothers in arms. They didn't just fight for themselves, they fought for each other. This concept of brotherhood was a core element of the gladiator ethos, something that separated them from mere fighters in the eyes of Roman society. They had a deep sense of loyalty, not just to the empire but to each other, making them a true warrior class. Winning wasn't just about the glory of the fight, it was about proving oneself to a higher power. A gladiator's victory was an act of devotion, a way to honor the gods and demonstrate the virtues that Roman society prized so highly. It wasn't just about bloodshed, it was about the struggle for respect and status. So, what did it truly mean to be a champion in ancient Rome? It wasn't just about defeating an opponent. It was about proving your worth, your honor, and your courage in the eyes of the public. It was about becoming a living legend, a hero celebrated not just for surviving, but for living by a code that valued strength, discipline, and honor. And the rewards, both in terms of freedom and status, were nothing short of extraordinary. In the next section, we'll explore how gladiators affected Roman society far beyond the arena. Stay with us, because what you'll discover will change the way you see the impact of these ancient warriors. Gladiators weren't just warriors on the battlefield. They were symbols of Roman culture, representative of ideals such as strength, honor, and courage. But their impact extended far beyond the bloodied sands of the Colosseum. Gladiators were deeply intertwined with the politics of ancient Rome, and their fame often served as a powerful tool for social influence. One of the most surprising things about gladiators is how much they shaped Roman society. For many, gladiators were more than just fighters. They were revered as symbols of Roman masculinity and endurance. Their courage was celebrated in stories, plays, and public life. They represented not only physical strength, but also the Roman ideals of valor, discipline, and unyielding determination. What many people don't realize is that gladiators had a unique relationship with Roman politicians. These warriors, especially the most famous ones, had the power to influence public opinion and were sometimes even used as political tools. Emperors, desperate to maintain their grip on power, could use the gladiatorial games to distract the public from political turmoil or to manipulate the masses. For instance, the games would often be used to demonstrate imperial generosity or to reinforce the emperor's authority. It was common for gladiators to be paraded as political pawns, used to solidify the emperor's status. And here's a little-known fact. Some gladiators became political figures themselves. Their fame was so widespread that they could wield influence outside the arena. With their celebrity status, some gladiators were able to play a role in Roman politics, often leveraging their popularity to gain power or favors from the elite. The famous gladiator Spartacus, for instance, led one of the largest slave uprisings in Roman history, a rebellion that challenged the very foundation of Roman authority. The gladiators' influence wasn't limited to politics alone. They were a reflection of Roman power and cultural ideals. Gladiators symbolized the might of the Roman Empire, its capacity to control and dominate. They were seen as champions of Rome, representing its military might and the strength of its people. Even those who were not famous gladiators contributed to the perception of Roman superiority and martial prowess. The very existence of the games demonstrated Roman dominance, and the ability to entertain and control such large spectacles was a testament to the empire's grandeur. But it's not all as glamorous as it seems. The reality of the gladiatorial games was far darker. While gladiators were admired by many, they were also seen as tools for entertainment, disposable individuals whose lives were at the mercy of the whims of the emperor and the crowd. This dual perception of gladiators, both revered and expendable, created a complex legacy that left a lasting impact on Roman society. What's even more interesting is how these gladiators, though often thought of as slaves or expendable, had a significant impact on the way Roman society viewed strength and bravery. Gladiators were praised for their ability to endure unimaginable hardship. Their fights weren't just about bloodshed, they were about survival, showing that victory didn't just depend on skill but on mental fortitude, discipline, and a moral code that transcended the fight itself. Even the lowest-ranking gladiators, those who were not champions, were still valued for their resilience and bravery. However, there's a myth we need to address. Many people still think that gladiators were mostly slaves, forced to fight in the arena. They were individuals seeking fame, fortune, or simply the chance to prove their worth. They wanted to be recognized and revered as heroes. Gladiators were given the opportunity to earn money, fame, and sometimes even their freedom, which made the profession appealing to many. The line between slaves and free men in the gladiatorial context was often blurred, as many gladiators lived lives that were more complicated than simple enslavement. But what about those gladiators who didn't seek fame, but fought out of necessity? These were men and women who had no choice but to fight for their lives. Some were criminals, while others were prisoners of war. Yet, even in these extreme circumstances, gladiators found ways to preserve their honor and dignity. They fought not just for survival, but to maintain their sense of identity and self-respect. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Gladiators were trained in ludiu, special schools where they learned not only the art of combat, but also the principles of discipline, restraint, and moral conduct. These ludi were more than just training grounds for battle. They were places where gladiators forged relationships, developed camaraderie, and formed lifelong bonds with their fellow fighters. Many gladiators lived by a code of honor, one that demanded loyalty to their comrades and respect for their opponents. This code helped to distinguish them from mere fighters and elevated them to a status that commanded respect in Roman society. But the public perception of gladiators was far from consistent. In the eyes of many, gladiators were brutal fighters, beasts of the arena. However, as the years went on, a shift occurred. The image of the gladiator as a hero began to gain traction. They were seen as symbols of bravery and sacrifice, their battles representing the very struggle of Roman society itself. The gladiators' fight became a metaphor for the larger conflicts of the empire, the struggles for power, dominance, and survival. Yet despite this transformation, the truth remains. Gladiators were ultimately pawns in a grand game of power and control. Their fame, their glory, and their honor were all tied to the whims of the emperor and the desires of the Roman public. Their fate was sealed by the very same forces that elevated them to hero status, and this duality, being both celebrated and disposable, became one of the most complex aspects of the gladiators' legacy. Today, we continue to celebrate the legacy of gladiators, whether in the movies, books, or other forms of media. But it's important to remember the complexity of their lives. Gladiators were more than just entertainers. They were men and women who fought for survival, for glory, and for honor, navigating a world that demanded both strength and sacrifice. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into the relationship between gladiators and the Roman emperors. How did these powerful figures influence the gladiators' fate? Stick around, because what you'll discover next will reveal the true complexities of the gladiatorial games and their place in Roman history. Gladiators were more than just bloodthirsty warriors fighting for survival in the arena. While the general perception often paints them as mere combatants, the reality is far more complex. What if I told you that their greatest weapon wasn't just their sword or their brute strength, but a code of honor that shaped their very actions? Gladiators followed a code that not only governed their fighting style, but their relationships with fellow gladiators, the audience, and even the Roman emperor. It wasn't about mindless violence. It was about respect, loyalty, and above all, a sense of duty. Now, imagine you are thrust into an arena, your fate determined by the fickle crowd and the emperor's will. The roar of the audience deafens you, the glint of weapons flashes in the sun, and you know that your survival depends on more than just skill with a blade. It depends on how you carry yourself. The gladiatorial code demanded dignity in the face of death. Many people think gladiators were forced into battle to die, but the truth is far more nuanced. While the idea of death in the arena has been sensationalized, most gladiators fought not to die, but to earn respect and survive long enough to gain freedom. So, what was it like for for gladiators really? Gladiators weren't simply slaves. Many were volunteers who saw the arena as a pathway to fame and fortune. They could earn substantial rewards, money, fame, and even freedom. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were often fighting for a better life. This wasn't a decision made lightly, but one motivated by glory, the promise of wealth, or perhaps even a chance at redemption. But here's the kicker. While gladiators earned fame, they didn't necessarily gain the respect they deserved. Their lives were valued only as much as their ability to entertain and fight. Gladiators could be sent into the arena to entertain the crowds, but they were often no more than tools in the emperor's quest to maintain power. Their lives, ironically, were celebrated, but at the same time considered expendable. What's more fascinating is the intricate relationship gladiators had with the Roman emperors. The gladiator status in society was often determined by how they interacted with those in power. Some gladiators, like the famous Spartacus, would become symbols of defiance, challenging the very empire that created the games. However, for the most part, gladiators were used by emperors as a means of propaganda. The public spectacle of the games, where gladiators fought for the amusement of the masses, was a tool for rulers to maintain control and distract from political unrest. The Roman emperor's relationship with gladiators was complex. On one hand, gladiators could gain favor by winning in the arena. Some even became part of the emperor's inner circle, rewarded with land, wealth, or special privileges. On the other hand, the emperor could use gladiators to reinforce their authority, or worse, as pawns in a dangerous game of survival. Gladiators could be forced to fight for political purposes, to entertain the masses, or to keep the population distracted from issues of greater importance. This dual role of gladiators, as both heroes and tools of political manipulation, was a fundamental contradiction of their existence. Did you know that the popularity of gladiators actually changed the perception of strength and bravery in Roman society? Gladiators became more than just combatants. They were symbols of what it meant to embody Roman ideals. Strength, honor, and courage were seen as essential qualities for any Roman, and gladiators personified these traits. Their battles became more than just displays of violence. They were seen as reflections of Roman values. This concept of heroism wasn't limited to the arena. Gladiators were highly regarded in the public eye, with some achieving celebrity status. They were celebrated for their physical prowess, their bravery in combat, and their ability to entertain. But the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about the hero's journey. The ultimate aim was not simply to win, but to win with honor. The gladiators' relationship with the crowd was pivotal. A victory wasn't just a triumph of strength. It was an opportunity to gain the respect of the audience, and in many cases to achieve fame and fortune. Interestingly, though the arena was a symbol of strength, it also became a stage for performances. Gladiators were required to entertain the crowd as much as they were required to fight. The crowd had a powerful influence on a gladiator's career. It could be their applause that saved a gladiator's life, or their jeers that led to a fighter's demise. Gladiators had to be skilled not only with weapons, but with showmanship as well. Now, here's a strange fact that may surprise you. Gladiators weren't always fighting to the death. While many people think that death was an inevitable part of every match, in reality, most gladiators fought for survival, not for death. The editor, the person responsible for organizing the games, often decided whether a fight would end in death or mercy. Many gladiators survived multiple rounds in the arena and were highly valued as fighters. They weren't cheap to replace, and so the idea of sending them to die for the entertainment of the crowd was often exaggerated for dramatic effect. So what was it that defined the true nature of gladiatorial combat? It wasn't simply the fight itself. The rituals surrounding the fight were just as important. Gladiators performed specific rituals before and after each fight, as they were seen as not just warriors but also heroes. These rituals gave the gladiators a sense of purpose and a mental edge before entering the arena. The prayers, the vows, the alliances, all these were essential in preparing gladiators for the battle ahead. It was a deeply cultural and psychological preparation that added layers of meaning to what might otherwise have been a simple physical contest. Being a champion gladiator meant far more than just surviving the arena. The title of Herodiarius, the title given to gladiators who had earned their freedom, was a symbol of achievement. It was an honor that not all gladiators could claim, but even those who didn't reach that level of fame were highly respected for their perseverance and fighting spirit. Gladiators were seen as paragons of Roman values, symbols of strength, determination, and the will to overcome adversity. And yet, despite their status, gladiators were often forced to navigate a world where their worth was determined not by their skill, but by the whims of others. Their relationship with their trainers, fellow gladiators, the crowd, and the emperor were all pieces of the larger puzzle of gladiatorial life. It was a life filled with contradictions, adored yet expendable, revered yet trapped within a cycle of violence. How did they influence politics, and what role did they play in shaping the very ideals of Roman culture? Stay tuned as we uncover the unexpected impact gladiators had on the empire that birthed them. Women fighting in the arena might sound unbelievable, but history reveals a different story. Did you know that female gladiators or gladiatresses did indeed exist in ancient Rome? These women fought just like their male counterparts, engaging in the same brutal battles for public entertainment. They were not only warriors in a society that was deeply patriarchal, but also symbols of power, strength, and resilience, breaking through rigid gender norms. You might be wondering, how could Roman society, with its strict views on gender, allow women to fight in such a violent arena? Most people think that the gladiatorial games were reserved for men, but the reality is much more complicated. While female gladiators were rare, they played an essential role in the games, often portrayed as symbols of defiance against societal expectations. These women weren't forced into the arena in the same way as slaves. Some volunteered, driven by the same desires for fame, glory, and the possibility of earning a better life that motivated their male counterparts. A strange fact about these gladiatresses is that their participation in the games wasn't just for show. They were taken seriously by the Roman people, often fighting in front of large audiences who were just as captivated by them as they were by male gladiators. In fact, when female gladiators appeared in the arena, they often drew just as much attention, sometimes even more, due to the rarity of their appearance. Think about it. Roman society, known for its masculine ideals, was forced to reckon with the sight of women battling in the arena, challenging its very foundation. But the question remains, what was their role in the arena, and why did they fight? While we don't know exactly how many female gladiators existed, we do know that their participation in the games represented a challenge to the social order of ancient Rome. Gladiatresses weren't just fighting for the emperor's amusement, they were fighting for their own place in history. For some, it was a means of achieving fame and wealth, while for others, it was simply the thrill of combat. Gladiators, just like their male counterparts, had to embody a strict code of conduct. They trained in the allure, just as men did, learning to master weapons, tactics, and the art of performance. The arena, after all, wasn't just about fighting, it was about entertaining the crowd, engaging in a spectacle that combined both skill and showmanship. Female gladiators were trained not only to be strong in battle, but also to engage the crowd, using the dramatic flair that was essential for gaining fame. Interestingly, many of the myths surrounding female gladiators often depict them as being forced into the arena, but historical accounts show that this wasn't necessarily the case. Some women entered the arena willingly, either as slaves or as volunteers seeking the fame and rewards associated with being a gladiator. This voluntary aspect of their participation breaks from the traditional narrative of helpless victims. Female gladiators fought not only for survival, but for honor and the promise of a better life, much like their male counterparts. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Despite their rarity, the presence of female gladiators was not something the Roman Empire tried to hide. In fact, their existence was recorded in inscriptions, mosaics, and even writings by Roman historians. Some emperors, particularly those looking to shock and awe the public, staged events that featured female gladiators, often for the sheer spectacle of it. This inclusion of women in such a violent and public display was a form of subversion, forcing the Roman populace to question its own rigid gender norms. The most striking part of all this is that these women were seen as symbols of power and honor, defying the traditional role that Roman society expected women to play. By stepping into the arena, they rejected the limitations placed on their gender and instead became icons of strength. Gladiatresses were not mere curiosities. They were respected fighters who earned the same admiration as their male counterparts. Yet even as they fought, they were challenging the status quo of Roman society. It's often said that these women were just another way for the emperors to entertain the crowds. But it wasn't just about the entertainment. Female gladiators represented a radical departure from the norms of the time. Their participation in the arena was not just for amusement, but also a message about breaking free from societal expectations. This makes us rethink the traditional narrative of Roman gender roles. Could it be that the women of ancient Rome, despite being outnumbered and often overlooked, held more power than we give them credit for? Let's dive deeper into their legacy. In a society where women were typically confined to domestic roles, gladiatresses not only participated in one of the most violent aspects of public life, but they also reshaped how women were perceived in the public eye. Gladiators in general, male and female, symbolized the very ideals of Roman society: bravery, strength, and the ability to overcome extreme adversity. For female gladiators, this was a revolutionary act, one that defied societal boundaries and left an imprint on history that continues to captivate us today. But here's a thought: are we romanticizing the role of female gladiators too much? Did they truly achieve the level of respect and status that we imagine, or were they simply used as sensational tools to awe the crowd? Some scholars argue that their role in the games was much more complex, and that their fame was not necessarily synonymous with empowerment. In reality, these women faced the same brutal conditions as their male counterparts, often forced to fight for survival. The truth behind their lives is much more complicated than the romanticized image we have today. In any case, the very existence of female gladiators challenges us to think about the nature of power and status in ancient Rome. It shows that even in one of the most patriarchal societies in history, women found ways to carve out their own paths of honor and respect. The gladiatresses may have been rare, but their legacy continues to inspire awe and admiration. Today, when we look back at the Gladiatorial Games, we're reminded not just of the brutality, but also of the defiance, strength, and resilience that these women represented. So, as we reflect on their legacy, it's clear that female gladiators were far more than just a sideshow. They were symbols of courage, pushing back against the constraints of their time, and their place in history demands to be remembered. Their story is a testament to the enduring human desire for freedom, honor, and the fight to be seen, even in the most difficult of circumstances. What happened to gladiators once their fighting days were over? Did they live out their days in peace, or was there another battle to face? Most people think gladiators lived happily ever after once they earned their freedom, but the reality is much more complex. After the arena, their struggles were far from over. Surviving a gladiatorial career was an achievement in itself, but it often came with a heavy price. For some gladiators, the fight didn't end with their final victory. Life after the arena was difficult, and many gladiators found themselves struggling to adapt to life outside the walls of the allure, the training schools, and the arena. There were no accolades or celebrations waiting for them when they left the battlefield. Instead, many gladiators faced a harsh reality where their past life as warriors haunted them in ways they hadn't anticipated. Now, let's take a step back. You might think that once a gladiator earned his freedom, he would be celebrated, living comfortably in the lap of luxury. Some did live out their days peacefully, enjoying the fame, money, and sometimes even the land that they earned through their victories. But for the majority, the reality was far different. Transition from being a celebrated fighter to an ordinary citizen was often rough and unsettling. Here's the truth. Gladiators were often seen as symbols of violence and brutality, regardless of whether they won their freedom. Their status as former fighters often overshadowed their attempts to reintegrate into Roman society. In fact, many retired gladiators found themselves living in the shadows of their past. While they may have earned their freedom or gained respect in the arena, they were still marked by their history as combatants. In a society that valued strength and martial prowess, this was both a blessing and a curse. It's important to understand how society viewed them after their fighting days were over. The public perception of gladiators was a double-edged sword. While some were celebrated as heroes, many were viewed with suspicion and disdain. Former gladiators had a hard time finding normal work in civilian life. For those who had been slaves or prisoners before becoming gladiators, their past life was always lingering in the background, a reminder of their lower status. But here's where it gets even more interesting. For those who survived long enough to retire, some gladiators transitioned into entirely different roles. They sometimes became trainers, known as gladiatorial, imparting their skills to the next generation of fighters. These former gladiators not only trained others in the art of combat, but also in the mentality needed to survive the arena. Their status as trainers provided them with a sense of respect in the gladiatorial community, allowing them to pass on their knowledge and preserve their legacy. However, not every gladiator was able to make that transition. For many, the change was too difficult. The loss of purpose, the struggle to find stable work, and the challenge of reintegrating into Roman society were just a few of the obstacles they faced. A gladiator's fame as a fighter didn't always guarantee success in civilian life. Many were left to find their own way, often relying on the only skills they knew. Some gladiators turned to teaching martial arts, while others resorted to the streets, struggling to find a place in a world that no longer saw them as warriors. These men had been conditioned for battle, with their mental and physical toughness honed to survive in the most brutal conditions imaginable. But outside the arena, that mental toughness wasn't always enough. Challenges they faced were not just physical. The mental strain of transitioning into civilian life was just as heavy. The emotional scars of their past, the constant reminder of the bloodshed and violence they had participated in, could be overwhelming. Some gladiators, even those who had survived, found it difficult to leave behind the mindset of a warrior. And then there's the matter of their financial situation. While some gladiators could earn significant amounts of money, especially if they were successful in the arena, many lived in poverty after retiring. The money they earned was often spent on gambling, drink, or lavish celebrations, leaving them with little to show for their efforts once they hung up their swords. This was especially true for those who had never achieved the status of the Eruditarius, the title given to those who had earned their freedom and special recognition for their bravery. But here's a fascinating fact. Some retired gladiators were able to carve out new identities for themselves entirely. They became successful in business, in politics, or even as entertainers. These men used their fame to forge new paths, becoming symbols of Roman power, endurance, and glory in ways that they never could have imagined when they first entered the arena. They were living proof that the gladiators' code didn't just shape their lives in the arena, it shaped their futures as well. So what happened to the gladiators who didn't find that new purpose? The sad reality is that many of them faded into obscurity. Their stories weren't always recorded in the annals of history, and for those who weren't lucky enough to make a name for themselves outside of the arena, they simply disappeared from the Roman narrative. Their lives, filled with struggle and survival, became just one of many forgotten stories of Rome's past. Let's pause for a moment and reflect on the true impact of a gladiator's life after the arena. They weren't just fighters, they were men who had lived through unimaginable experiences. Their stories are not only about their battles in the arena, but about the lives they built after their days of combat. For some, the Gladiatorial Games were a stepping stone to a different life. For others, the games were all they ever knew. Their afterlife wasn't just about physical survival, it was about finding a place in a society that viewed them both as heroes and as reminders of Rome's darker side. In the end, the story of gladiators lives after the arena is a tale of triumph and tragedy, of glory and struggle. The reality is far more complex than the simple narrative of warriors who fought for survival. These men and women fought not just for their lives but for the opportunity to rewrite their stories, and in doing so, they continue to fascinate and inspire us to this day. Fighting for survival in the arena must have been mentally grueling. Gladiators cope with the psychological challenges of their violent world. Most people think gladiators were simply hardened fighters with unshakable resolve, but in reality they faced immense mental stress, often bearing scars that went far beyond the physical. For many gladiators, the psychological toll of constant combat and the ever-present threat of death was unbearable. The fear of dying was real, not just in the arena but in every moment leading up to it. Even when the adrenaline of a fight subsided, the emotional weight of knowing the next battle could be their last was a heavy burden. These warriors weren't just fighting for their lives, they were battling with their own minds. But what really makes this aspect fascinating is the way gladiators were trained to mentally prepare themselves for the arena. The physical preparation was intense, yes, but their mental conditioning was just as crucial, if not more so. Gladiators underwent mental training that aimed to create a mindset of resilience. It wasn't enough to be strong, they had to be unflinching in the face of death. To survive, they had to believe that their survival wasn't just a matter of chance, it was a matter of willpower, focus, and mental toughness. One might wonder, how could anyone endure such extreme conditions without breaking? The answer lies in the concept of camaraderie and the brotherhood among gladiators. The shared experience of pain, fear, and survival created bonds that were deeper than most of the relationships in Roman society. Gladiators leaned on each other for emotional support, forming a network of psychological resilience. Their sense of community was a powerful buffer against the mental stress they faced. These relationships weren't just about survival in the physical sense, they were about emotional survival as well. But what happens when that brotherhood is broken? What happens when a gladiator faces a fight alone, with no one to back him up? This is where things get even more complex. The mental fortitude required to step into the arena was immense. Gladiators weren't just trained to fight, they were trained to push through fear, self-doubt, and the looming specter of death. To do this, they relied on rituals, both physical and mental, to prepare themselves for the upcoming battle. Before each fight, gladiators would engage in specific rituals, offering prayers or invoking gods, hoping for victory. These rituals gave them a sense of control, an illusion of power in a situation where the outcome was often determined by the whims of the editor and the crowd. Despite these efforts to shield themselves from the psychological toll, many gladiators suffered from what we would now recognize as PTS, the constant exposure to violence, the stress of survival, and the trauma of watching their comrades fall in battle left deep scars. Some gladiators found ways to cope by finding solace in their rituals, while others turned to substances like alcohol or gambling to numb the pain. The arena, while a place of glory, was also a place of mental torment. Interestingly, the concept of PTSD wasn't recognized in ancient Rome, but it certainly existed. Gladiators who survived long enough to retire often carried the psychological weight of their past battles for the rest of their lives. For some, the transition from the arena to civilian life was nearly impossible. The constant awareness that death could come at any moment had reshaped their minds. When the fighting was over, they didn't just stop fighting, they stopped knowing how to live without the constant presence of danger. This psychological toll wasn't just limited to the gladiators themselves. The Roman public too had a complex relationship with gladiators. On one hand, they were seen as heroes, the epitome of Roman bravery and strength. On the other hand, they were also tools for entertainment, reduced to nothing more than instruments of bloodshed. This public perception, swinging between admiration and dehumanization, must have had its own psychological impact on the gladiators. But let's take a step back. What was the true cost of being a gladiator? Gladiators were warriors, yes, but they were also men who lived through a unique form of mental conditioning. The emotional and psychological scars they carried were as deep as the physical wounds. The question becomes, how did they cope with these lasting effects, and what can we learn from their ability to survive such immense mental stress? The answer is that they coped in part through their relationships, rituals, and mental toughness. The gladiators were in many ways masters of their own fate, not because they had control over their physical environment, but because they were trained to take control over their minds. The mental resilience they developed to survive the arena is something that we can all learn from. It's a reminder that the greatest battles aren't always fought with swords or shields. Sometimes the fiercest struggles are the ones fought within. In the end, the story of a gladiator's psychological journey is not just about violence and combat. It is about survival in the truest sense. It's about understanding how the mind can be both a weapon and a prison. Gladiators faced not only the brutality of the arena, but the quiet, often invisible battles within themselves. Their story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and how even in the face of unimaginable trauma, it's possible to endure, to fight on, and to ultimately emerge stronger. In ancient Rome, gladiators were seen in two very different lights. On one hand, they were brutal combatants, forced to fight for their lives in a spectacle of violence. But on the other, they were heroes, symbols of strength, courage, and honor. But how did the public really view these warriors, and what was their true status in Roman society? Most people think gladiators were simply tools for entertainment, their lives reduced to nothing more than bloodshed for the masses. But the truth is much more nuanced and far more interesting. While it's true that gladiators were part of a bloody spectacle, spectacle, they were also deeply intertwined with the cultural and moral fabric of Roman society. In fact, many gladiators were revered as symbols of bravery and sacrifice. They embodied the Roman ideals of strength, honor, and duty. Their valor was celebrated, and their image was often idealized, making them heroes in the eyes of the public. In Roman society, gladiators had a dual image. On one hand, they were brutal, feared fighters, essentially prisoners of war or slaves, forced to fight for the entertainment of the masses. On the other hand, they were also seen as embodiments of the Roman warrior ethos. Gladiators fought to uphold these ideals, representing the ultimate display of courage, resilience, and loyalty. One interesting aspect of their public image is the way the Romans glorified their battles. While gladiators were often depicted as fearsome warriors, they were also celebrated for their heroism, bravery, and the willingness to sacrifice themselves for the crowd. In fact, over time, the view of gladiators evolved from mere entertainers to warriors with a complex code of honor. They became symbols of personal sacrifice, fighting not just for survival but for the greater good of Rome. This perception wasn't just limited to the Roman elite or those who supported the games. Even common Roman citizens admired gladiators for their physical prowess and their mental fortitude. Interestingly, some gladiators became almost as famous as the greatest warriors or generals of their time. Their names would be remembered for centuries, not just as fighters, but as legends in the Roman collective memory. Now, winning in the arena could mean fame and adulation, often turning gladiators into celebrities comparable to modern sports stars. But what about the more controversial aspects of their public perception? Many gladiators, despite their heroic status, were still viewed as expendable, their lives valued less than their ability to entertain. The gladiator's life was a paradox. They were at once loved and admired, yet seen as little more than property, trained to kill and die for the amusement of others. What's more surprising is that the Roman public often saw gladiators as embodiments of Roman virtues like stoicism, courage, and even loyalty. For example, gladiators would sometimes fight for their lives, not just for their personal survival, but to protect others, even those they did not know. These acts of selflessness were admired by the Roman people, who saw them as examples of true Roman courage, transcending the brutal reality of the arena. This dual image of gladiators, as both heroes and victims, was deeply ingrained in Roman culture. The Gladiatorial Games, while providing entertainment and displaying physical prowess, were also meant to reflect the Roman values of discipline, honor, and strength. The public perception of gladiators was complex. They were fighters to be feared and revered, but also pawns in the political and social game of the Roman Empire. They were at once powerful symbols and tragic figures, constantly living on the edge between glory and despair. But why did the public view them this way? It all boils down to the way gladiators were used as tools of Roman propaganda. The games were more than just bloodthirsty entertainment. They were also a reflection of Rome's political and military dominance. Gladiators, whether they were fighting for freedom or simply fulfilling their duty, represented the strength of the Roman state. They embodied the idea that Roman power was unassailable and that its citizens, even its lowest classes, were capable of tremendous acts of courage. There's something fascinating about how the public used gladiators as mirrors of their own ideals. Now, while the Romans may have seen gladiators as inferior or expendable in some ways, they also elevated them to the status of heroes, capable of acts of extraordinary bravery and honor. This paradox is what makes the public's perception of gladiators so unique and so emblematic of the contradictions within Roman society itself. In the next few sections, we will explore just how this public perception shaped the lives of gladiators, and how their role in society extended beyond the arena and into the hearts and minds of the Roman people. But first, we need to understand the true nature of their existence. Were gladiators merely disposable fighters, or were they the true heroes of ancient Rome? The gladiator games have long captivated our imaginations, often portrayed as violent spectacles filled with bloodshed and savage warriors. But what if we told you that there's more to gladiators than the gruesome fights we see in the movies? What if their true strength wasn't just in their muscles and weapons, but in something far deeper? A code of honor, a warrior's ethos that governed their every move. Imagine, for a moment, being a gladiator. You've been forced into a life of combat, battling for your survival, your freedom, your dignity. Yet despite the violence, the chaos, and the uncertainty, you are still expected to abide by a strict code, one that demands respect, loyalty, and discipline. How does this work, and why did these warriors, often seen as tools for entertainment, follow a moral code so profound it mirrored the values of the society they fought for? In ancient Rome, gladiators were not just the mindless fighters we often think of. They were also symbols of Roman virtues, embodying strength, honor, and sacrifice. They fought in the arena, but their battles were also about something far greater than personal survival. And it's this paradox that makes the gladiator story so compelling. They were, in essence, both victims and heroes. But what about their lasting impact on Roman society? What did gladiators mean beyond the Colosseum? And how did they shape the culture that adored them? Were they simply tools of entertainment, or was there something much more profound to their legacy? Before we explore that deeper, let's first dive into a surprising truth. Not all gladiators were slaves. Some chose this life willingly. They volunteered for the arena, seeking fame, fortune, and glory. In fact, many gladiators became celebrities in their time, earning respect, admiration, and wealth. They trained in special schools known as allure, where they were molded not just as fighters, but as warriors of great skill and discipline. Yet despite their fame, gladiators often lived a life in the shadows. They were praised for their courage in the arena, but were still, for the most part, viewed as disposable. Their status was complex, straddling the line between slaves and free men. The decision to become a gladiator was not an easy one. It was often motivated by personal circumstances or the desire for glory. But regardless of their status, they shared a code that transcended the brutal nature of their profession. In the arena, respect for their opponents and the crowd was paramount. Gladiators had a responsibility not just to win, but to do so with dignity. When they lost, they were expected to surrender honorably, accepting defeat with grace. This was a strange concept. After all, their very survival depended on winning. But the gladiators' code demanded that they fight with honor, even if it meant sacrificing their life. This strict adherence to honor wasn't something they learned by accident. It was ingrained in their training. They were taught not only to fight, but to embody the ideals of the Roman warrior ethos. They were conditioned to be resilient, to fight with discipline, and to approach each battle with a calm, unflinching mindset. Gladiators were often trained by masters known as voluntarily, who didn't just teach combat techniques. They taught life lessons, focusing on both mental and physical strength. Gladiators weren't merely trained to kill, they were trained to embody the very spirit of Rome itself. But their role in Roman society was far more complicated than simply following a code. The gladiators were seen as performers, and their battles weren't just physical contests. They were spectacles designed to entertain and impress the audience. The crowd was a vital part of the Gladiatorial Games. Their reactions could decide a gladiator's fate. A victorious gladiator could become a hero, but if they failed to earn the crowd's favor, they could quickly fall out of grace. Gladiators learned to read the crowd, adjusting their performance to gain their approval. The approval of the people was crucial to their survival, and it often determined whether they lived or died. Gladiators weren't just fighting for their lives, they were also fighting for their reputation and status. If they succeeded in impressing the crowd, they could achieve fame, wealth, and sometimes even freedom. But even though the arena was a place of great danger, it was also a place of brotherhood. Gladiators forged deep bonds with their fellow combatants. Their lives were intertwined in ways that went beyond combat. They were family. They supported each other through the rigors of training, through the brutality of battle, and in the face of death. Gladiators often swore oaths of loyalty to one another, vowing to protect their comrades in the arena. These bonds were formed under extreme conditions, and they were often deeper than those found in ordinary Roman society. It's important to understand that while many people believed gladiators were mere slaves, some of them were revered heroes in their own right. In fact, gladiators who survived enough battles could earn the title of herediarius, a free man who had earned his liberty. This title carried great prestige and allowed the gladiator to live a life of relative comfort after the arena. Some gladiators even became wealthy, gaining sponsorships or attracting the attention of the Roman elite. This wasn't a common path, but it was possible. Now, let's address one of the most enduring myths about gladiators, the idea that they always fought to the death. The truth is, most gladiatorial matches didn't end in death. Gladiators were valuable investments, and losing them in every fight wasn't practical. The editor or organizer of the games often had the final say in whether a match would end in death or mercy. The fights were designed to entertain, not to kill, and many gladiators were able to fight for years before ultimately retiring. But for all their valor, gladiators also faced a psychological toll. The constant threat of death, the brutal training, and the grueling battles could wear down even the toughest warriors. Gladiators were forced to develop immense mental resilience to survive in such a violent world. Some suffered from PTSD-like symptoms, while others found solace in the bonds of brotherhood they shared with their fellow fighters. So what happened to gladiators after their fighting days were over? Some lived out their days in peace, continuing to train new fighters and passing on their skills. But for many, the transition to civilian life was not easy. The stigma of being a gladiator lingered, and many found it difficult to shed the identity of a warrior. Even those who retired often lived in the shadows, forever defined by their time in the arena. In the end, gladiators left an indelible mark on Roman society. They were more than just fighters. They were symbols of Roman honor, courage, and strength. Their legacy lives on today in our fascination with ancient combat, heroism, and the complex nature of survival and honor. What can we learn from gladiators today? Their values of honor, loyalty, and mental strength are just as relevant now as they were in ancient Rome. Gladiators teach us about resilience, the importance of brotherhood, and how we can maintain our integrity even in the most challenging circumstances. Today, gladiators live on not just in history, but in the struggles we face every day in our own arenas. Maximus, the ultimate gladiator, epitomizes everything that the gladiator ethos stands for: strength, loyalty, and the relentless pursuit of justice. But what makes him the ultimate gladiator in history? And his fighting skills, his ability to withstand any challenge. But what if it's something much deeper? The unshakable code of honor that guides his every move. Maximus doesn't just fight for survival. He fights for a cause, for revenge, and for his own sense of moral righteousness, something that transcends the brutality of the arena. But Maximus isn't a one-dimensional character. He represents the tension between the warrior's brutal world and their inner moral compass. Gladiators weren't simply ruthless fighters. They were men who lived by a strict code, one that demanded respect, discipline, and honor even in the most violent of circumstances. Maximus, like many gladiators, navigates this tightrope between power and integrity, constantly battling not only his enemies in the arena but his own inner turmoil. Maximus' story begins with a tragedy, a loss of everything he held dear. He is betrayed, captured, and forced into the world of gladiatorial combat. Yet, instead of becoming a mere pawn in a brutal game, he emerges as a leader. His actions reveal the very essence of gladiatorial honor, his desire to see justice, to avenge the wrongs done to him, and to restore his honor. And of course, he does it all while embodying the very qualities that the gladiators of ancient Rome held most dear: resilience, loyalty, and a commitment to justice. The journey of Maximus isn't just about surviving the arena, it's about holding on to his humanity in a world that thrives on violence. His moral struggle is a perfect reflection of the gladiators who fought in Rome's blood-stained arenas. They weren't just warriors, they were symbols of an ethos that combined bravery, sacrifice, and honor. They were more than the sum of their battles, and represented the virtues that the Roman Empire cherished most, even if they had to sacrifice everything to uphold them. So what made Maximus stand out from the rest? It's his unwavering commitment to these principles. And as the world around him descends into chaos, Maximus holds on to the values of loyalty and honor. He refuses to let the brutality of the arena corrupt him. Maximus isn't just a hero because of his fighting skills. He's a hero because he fights for something greater than himself. He fights for honor, for revenge, and for a future where the truth is revealed, no matter the cost. The gladiator's journey was never just about physical combat. It was about mental fortitude and the ability to hold on to one's sense of purpose despite overwhelming odds. Gladiators like Maximus didn't just need strength in their arms. They needed strength of character. Maximus's story illustrates that the true battle of a gladiator isn't fought with swords or shields, it's fought within. As Maximus, apart from other gladiators, is his ability to maintain this honor, even when the system itself is corrupt. Gladiators were often treated as mere tools for entertainment, disposable once their usefulness had ended. Yet Maximus, despite being cast into this world of cruelty, doesn't lose his moral compass. He embodies the idea of a gladiator as more than just a fighter. He is a symbol of resistance, of moral courage in the face of corruption. Maximus's journey is ultimately one of redemption. In the end, he not only seeks justice for himself, but also for Rome itself. His actions, the choices he makes, and the sacrifices he endures embody the very heart of what it meant to be a gladiator, fighting not just for survival, but for something far more meaningful. The gladiator ethos is a complex code that revolves around honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. These are the same values Maximus holds on to as he fights not only for revenge, but for the future of the empire. In the world of ancient Rome, gladiators like Maximus weren't just slaves or tools of entertainment. They were men who lived by an unspoken code, one that demanded respect, loyalty, and a moral clarity that transcended the violence of the arena. Maximus's story reflects this code, and his character challenges us to rethink our perception of gladiators. They weren't just fighters, they were embodiments of honor, resilience, and the unwavering fight for justice. The gladiatorial games may be long gone, but the legacy of warriors like Maximus lives on in the lessons they taught about honor, duty, and sacrifice. Their story isn't just one of blood and battle, it's one of ideals, and of holding on to what's truly important, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Through Maximus, we see that the true strength of a gladiator lies not in his ability to fight, but in his ability to stand firm in his beliefs, no matter what the world throws at him. The decline of gladiatorial games in ancient Rome was tied to much more than just the rise of Christianity, though that certainly played a role. It was also influenced by shifting political ideologies, changing values in society, and a gradual transformation of Roman entertainment and public life. At the height of the games, gladiatorial combat symbolized the might and supremacy of the Roman Empire, a brutal display of power that was woven into the very fabric of Roman culture. But by the 5th century AD, these games began to fade away as the Roman Empire itself was evolving, and a new vision of Roman society was emerging, one that no longer glorified violence in the same way. Imagine a time when brutal spectacles were the centerpiece of public life, when people flocked to the Colosseum to cheer on combatants who fought to the death for their entertainment. It seems almost unfathomable in today's world, but that was the reality for the Romans. Gladiators weren't just soldiers fighting for glory. They were symbols of Roman power, and their battles represented the empire's ability to conquer, control, and instill fear. The gladiatorial games became a tool of propaganda, showing the world Rome's unyielding strength and military superiority. But what caused this iconic tradition to come to an end? Was it just the rise of Christianity that led to the eventual outlawing of these games? In fact, it was a combination of factors, each contributing to the decline of one of the most emblematic practices of the Roman Empire. Let's start with Christianity. As the Roman Empire adopted Christianity as its official religion, many aspects of Roman culture began to change. The Christian Church, with its strong moral teachings, opposed the violence and bloodshed of the gladiatorial games. Christian leaders, seeing the games as morally corrupt and incompatible with their religious beliefs, pushed for their cessation. It wasn't just a matter of faith, though. Christianity's rise meant a shift in the values that guided Roman society. The emphasis emphasis moved from might and spectacle to more peaceful, pious ideals. Gladiatorial games as an institution simply no longer fit into this new paradigm. But Christianity wasn't the only force behind the decline of the gladiatorial games. By the 4th and 5th centuries, Rome was under increasing pressure from external invasions and internal decay. The once mighty empire was fracturing, and the resources that supported the extravagant gladiatorial games were dwindling. It's a bit ironic. As the empire weakened, so too did the spectacle that had been such a powerful symbol of its might. The cost of putting on these events became a luxury that Rome could no longer afford, both financially and politically. Moreover, the Roman aristocracy, who had once been the primary patrons of these games, began to shift their support toward more civilized forms of entertainment, such as chariot racing and theatrical performances. These newer spectacles didn't carry the same brutal connotations and became more aligned with the changing tastes of the Roman elite. There was also a growing distaste for the games from the general population. As the empire became more urbanized, the citizens of Rome grew less interested in witnessing such violent events. The desire for more refined, less barbaric forms of entertainment began to overshadow the gladiatorial games. It's important to note that even though gladiatorial combat became increasingly unpopular, its legacy endured. The games may have ended, but gladiators remained a powerful symbol in Roman culture. The concept of the gladiator as the ultimate warrior, willing to sacrifice everything for honor and glory, never truly faded from public consciousness. Instead, it morphed into other aspects of Roman culture, such as literature, art, and even later forms of military service. So, how did the gladiatorial games officially meet their end? The exact moment of their cessation is hard to pinpoint, but by the early 5th century the games had all but disappeared. The Emperor Honorius, in 404 AD, issued an edict officially banning the games, citing both moral objections from Christian leaders and the empire's inability to support such lavish events. It was a decisive moment in the history of Rome, signaling the end of an era of public spectacles that had once defined the city. However, while the games themselves may have come to a close, the gladiators' spirit, their ethos of honor, strength, and sacrifice, continued to echo throughout Roman history and beyond. In modern times, the gladiator has become a symbol not only of ancient Rome, but of the eternal struggle between good and evil, strength and honor. From movies to video games, gladiators continue to inspire admiration for their bravery, their discipline, and their commitment to a code that transcends time. Despite the end of the games, the gladiatorial ethos lives on. Today, we still see echoes of that warrior spirit in athletes, soldiers, and everyday people who fight their own personal battles. Gladiators may have fought in the arenas of ancient Rome, but their code of honor, loyalty, and resilience remains alive today, teaching us valuable lessons about the nature of courage and perseverance. As we look back on the history of gladiators, we gain a deeper understanding of the Roman Empire's transformation from a brutal, war-driven society to one that eventually embraced more peaceful and humane values. The end of the gladiatorial games marked the end of an era, but it also signified the beginning of a new chapter in Roman history, where power was no longer measured by the blood spilled in the arena, but by the strength of ideals and the resilience of the people. What can modern society learn from gladiators today? You might think gladiators were simply ancient warriors who fought for entertainment, but there's more to their legacy than meets the eye. Their values of honor, loyalty, and resilience are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. Gladiators were not just fighters, they were symbols of overcoming adversity, surviving the harshest environments, and maintaining personal integrity in the face of challenges. In a world where challenges are often psychological or personal rather than physical, we can still find lessons in their ethos. Consider this: gladiators lived by a code that demanded courage, discipline, and the ability to face death without flinching. They had to remain focused on the present, suppressing fear, doubt, and even the natural human instinct for self-preservation in favor of duty and honor. This mindset helped them survive the brutal combat of the arena and win the respect of both their peers and their audience. In a world where people face their own personal battles, whether in sports, work, or relationships, this kind of mental resilience is still something we admire and strive for. The gladiators' ability to stand strong, knowing that they might face death at any moment, speaks to the broader theme of facing the unknown with bravery. It's a quality seen in athletes who push their bodies to the limit, soldiers who endure the toughest conditions, and everyday people who face personal struggles with dignity. The lessons from gladiators are timeless, teaching us the value of persistence, the importance of holding true to our principles, and the power of brotherhood. But it's not just about resilience. Gladiators also demonstrated the importance of loyalty, not just to their trainers but to their fellow combatants. Brotherhood in the Uludijik, the gladiator training schools, was paramount. They formed tight-knit communities, and these relationships were forged through mutual respect, shared hardship, and the unspoken bond that came with being thrust into such a deadly environment. In the modern world, loyalty still holds significant value, whether in the military, in close friendships, or within organizations. Gladiators knew that their survival often depended not just on their individual skill but on their ability to rely on others. Moreover, their sense of honor shaped how they performed, both in battle and in life. Gladiators understood that every fight, every action, was part of their legacy. They didn't fight just to survive, they fought to be remembered, to earn their place in history, and to show the world the strength of their character. This desire to leave behind a meaningful legacy still drives many people today, whether they're athletes striving for greatness or individuals seeking to make an impact in their chosen field. What does it all mean for us today? The gladiator ethos is more than a relic of the past. It's an enduring symbol of overcoming adversity with dignity and fighting for what's right, regardless of the odds. Modern society faces different arenas, but the challenges remain. We may not step into an actual combat arena, but we all have our own battles to face. Gladiators teach us that success isn't just about the fight itself. It's about how we approach it, how we stay true to our values, and how we support each other along the way. Their legacy, though rooted in violence, isn't just about bloodshed. It's about the virtues they exemplified: honor, loyalty, and resilience. We carry these lessons with every day. Whether you're an athlete pushing through a tough workout, an entrepreneur battling to make your vision a reality, or someone overcoming personal struggles, the gladiator's ethos serves as a powerful reminder. The fight may be tough, but with honor, honesty, loyalty, and mental strength, you can endure and emerge victorious. Now, more than ever, we need to embody these qualities: strength, resilience, and loyalty in our own lives. The gladiator's journey might be long over, but the lessons they impart still resonate today. So, what do you think? How does the gladiator spirit influence your own life? If you enjoyed this epic journey, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical tales. Don't miss out on new videos. Hit the notification bell to stay updated.